Well, welcome to Round the Table Live with Christian Concern. And today we are talking about, does the government care about free speech? And I'm delighted to be welcomed today by a special guest, Chief Executive of the Bad Law Project, Harry Miller.
Yeah, hi, Tim.
Harry, it's great to have you with us. Been on a couple of times before, I think, with us. Always enjoy your perspective on things. And we also got Roger Kiska, legal counsel for the Christian Legal Centre, on with us as well. Roger, welcome to you as well.
Great to be here. Thank you, Tim.
Good to see you. So we've had a few news items this week that relate to free speech, and I'm going to try and get through them and talk about them in the next few minutes. If you're watching live today on Facebook or YouTube, do put in your comments and questions there, and I'll try and get them and discuss them. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is an amendment that was debated in Parliament this week to the Financial Services Bill, amendment proposed by Sally Ann Hart MP, that would have made it illegal for a financial service provider to close an account of a group for free speech reasons. Now, we're familiar with this because it's got in the media about PayPal closing the Free Speech Union's accounts. And we also know that Core Issues Trust, one of our clients at Christian Concern, had its bank account closed by Barclays, and that went to court just a few weeks ago. We're still waiting to hear the results of that particular legal battle. Harry, you've got some experience of this as well. What's your perspective on what's happening with all of this financial services and free speech?
Yeah, well, we do. The Bad Law Project is part and parcel of the Reclaim movement. It's the legal wing, if you like. What we do is agitate and potentially bring judicial review against the foundational institutions when they overstep the mark. Now, this was all born out of Lawrence Fox's Reclaim party, and before I joined Reclaim, they had one heck of a job getting a bank account. Eventually, they did get a bank account with Metro. There were some fairly severe restrictions around that, in that there could only be one donor, and that was Jeremy Hoskin. So we couldn't take money from anybody else whatsoever.
That's crazy. One donor, only allowed one donor.
Well, only allowed one donor.
What,
yeah,
for
only
a political party.
Yeah, only allowed one donor. That's right. Well, we were only allowed one. Well, we were only allowed one donor to use the bank account. Now, what we could have done, of course, is taken money and stuck it in a jiffy bag and put it under our beds, because what else could we do? No, we didn't have anybody giving us money in jiffy bags and sticking it under our beds. But that's what it's driving you to. Anyway, we complied 100% with their requirements. Then earlier this year, they decided that they'd lost their appetite for having a political party bank account, and they gave us notice and closed us down. So that's where we are, Tim. It's quite traumatic. It's very inconvenient.
They just closed their bank account. Did they give any reason for closing the bank account?
Just because they can. Just because they can.
That was Metro Bank.
Yeah, the Metro Bank. Yeah, they said they'd had a change of appetite. That was it. In other words, they decided that we were ideologically unsound, and their terms and conditions allowed them to shut us down with a period of notice, and that was that. So that's what happened to us. And I know it's not unique to Reclaim. I know it's an experience amongst many smaller parties getting insurance services, getting banking services. It's very, very difficult, because once they decide that you are a politically exposed person, everybody runs a mile, or they hike their prices up to such an extent that it becomes impractical to take those services on. Now we got round. Well, we didn't get around that. In actual fact, what we did was we shifted from being a political party to setting up a media company called Reclaim the Media and the Bad Law Project, and we did that. So they're set up as companies, straightforward limited companies, and of course at that point you're able to get financial services again. So that's the workaround that we did. But if you think about it, Tim, these are the financial services trying to drive you underground. They're trying to drive you underground. They're trying to, and if you go underground, then you're not that far from becoming dodgy, criminal, maybe. At the very least, you can't show the money trails, the money coming in, the money going out. So it leaves you wide open to criticism of fraud and all the rest of it. And they are doing it. We wanted a bank account. We wanted to be scrutinized. We wanted to be able to hand in our account and our bank account to an accountant, have them all signed off, and send them to the Electoral Commission, and for them to see it all. Well, they're not allowing us to do that. So that's the position that we're in.
Right. Wow. And Roger, what's your perspective on this from a free speech perspective when you think about Core Issues Trust and the Free Speech Union and all that kind of thing?
I mean, it's baffling that this could be happening in a so-called tolerant and democratic society. I think to the Equality Act, for example, which doesn't apply specifically to a lot of the relationships we're talking about, but that whole piece of legislation was designed to prevent unlawful discrimination. Some of it, a particular characteristic being religion or belief. So when you have the expressed beliefs of an individual or an organization or a charity being the sole basis by which they're being forbidden from entering the public square through financial services or otherwise, it's clearly something that hurts the democratic process. It's intolerant, it's discriminatory, and I think it's wonderful that at least some effort has been taken at the parliamentary level to introduce an amendment to existing legislation which would stop the cancel culture from being allowed to do that.
Do you think that, I understand this amendment's now being withdrawn because the government has said they're going to discuss it. Do you think existing laws are sufficient, or do you think that we could
clearly not? No, clearly not. Because, I mean, PayPal, the banks, they're doing this with impunity. They're asking for their cases to be struck out because they think that they're so bold in doing this that groups like Core Issues Trust or other groups that are being canceled are so nefarious and seedy that no one's going to question their decision to do that. And that's not how anti-discrimination law works. And that's not how free speech law works. The whole purpose of free speech law is the ability to say things that other people don't agree with. Otherwise, it's no freedom at all.
So, and Harry, if it starts with groups like this, it'll end up with churches and Christians, will it not?
Yeah, it can go wherever the government decides it's going to go. And of course, it's not just the government anymore, is it? Because we've moved to a position where government is almost irrelevant to corporation. I'm a free market capitalist, 100%. But even I can see the danger where you have large companies who operate like imperial empires, cross-border imperial empires. Sure. What really is the choice? If you don't like Apple, for instance, what is the choice really? Google? Well, they're doing the same thing. One is just another version of the other. It's not like choosing between Tesco's and Sainsbury's, is it? And these companies, these mega organizations, they run across national boundaries. They run across national governments, and the banks and the financial services sectors are doing precisely the same. Now, what worries me about this sort of economic sanction, Joe Biden doesn't say much that I agree with, but he was right about this. He said economic sanctions are a new kind of statecraft with the power to inflict damage that rivals military might. The sanctions sap strength and the ability to project power. Now, of course, he was saying that in relation to the closing down the banking ability and the financial services in relation to Russia. But it's a lesson which they've adopted against ideological groups which the large corporations disapprove of. That's my worry. Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of partial good news, isn't it? What's happened this week, because the government has agreed to sort of discuss it further, and that maybe there is a problem here. Although they also, I think, trying to claim that existing laws are sufficient. But it's kind of partial good news in terms of where we go, and obviously we await the results in the Barclays case, the case against Barclays Bank from Core Issues Trust, where they tried to strike it out. And
that'll be a good indicator in any case of whether existing laws are sufficient.
Well, they will, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Are you optimistic about that case, Roger?
It's just a case where Courtiers Trust, for absolutely no reason, was told that their bank account was being shut down. There's been a lengthy period of negotiation between the two sides, with Barclays feeling that they have the upper hand, and that as a multinational bank, they can do stuff with impunity, as I was saying before, and they've sought to strike out. I think our arguments are compelling. I think this is clearly a case where they're closing business just because of the viewpoints held by the bank account holder, and that's discriminatory under any definition of the word.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
if I might just interject, Tim, I'm not a huge fan of the left-wing writer Naomi Klein, but she writes some very good stuff in the book The Shock Doctrine. And we see this in following the Patriot Act, following 9/11, that I think George W. Bush introduced. It was designed to starve the funding of terrorists, but actually it was a Trojan horse for bringing in all kinds of surveillance, snooping, and indefinite detention. And what's happened here? They found a new purpose for what they were doing within the Patriot Act. So they've moved it from straight up terrorists, and they're now using it as a way to monitor, snoop on, shut down, and indefinitely censure groups which they ideologically disapprove of. And it's moving out of the big banks into the likes of PayPal, but also in terms of service providers. Just this week, or this last month, Sarah Fillamore, my co-founder of Fair Cop, she was putting on a book launch, I think scheduled for later this year, selling tickets through Eventbrite. Eventbrite shut it down. Shut it down. So you can no longer buy tickets via Eventbrite. Why? Because they decided that we are an unsound organization, that the ideology of the book is unsound, and they'll have nothing to do with it. Now, of course, we're challenging that. Sarah is an absolute wizard, a legal wizard, and she's threatened them with judicial review. Now, of course, judicial review is generally speaking restricted to public bodies. But when an organization acts as a proxy public body, then it's a high bar, but you can take them to judicial review. And we've threatened Eventbrite with precisely that. And we are expecting their response sometime next week.
Why not going for the non-discrimination?
But judicial review, we can do that as well. But we threaten with discrimination and judicial review, because this is what's happening. As I was saying earlier, Tim, you've got these organizations which are growing so big and they become so powerful that they act almost like proxy government departments. Yeah. So when they start doing that, they then expose themselves to the potential of judicial review. And it's a high bar, but it's possible, and we're looking into it.
Well, all the best with that, because we've got a book launch, and we're selling tickets on Eventbrite for a book launch for Question Chelsea Muslim Friends later this month. So that's very interesting to hear about that. I do want to hear how that goes. Keep us in touch on that one, Harry. Let's move on to another area where free speech has been in the news this week, which is this whole concept of buffer zones around abortion clinics. Now, there was an amendment to the Public Order Bill that actually was passed on a vote in the House of Commons last month, and it went to the House of Lords. And the government actually admitted in a formal statement that this amendment would breach human rights. It then got debated in the House of Lords. Roger, what's your take on what's happening here with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling. Yeah, that admission is there unanswered for the public to see. Basically, the excuse was, and it's a valid excuse, that you can't bridle Parliament in how they choose to vote or what laws they tend to choose to put forward. All you can do after the fact is to go to the courts and seek an order of incompatibility with the convention, thus making the law moot. This is a ridiculous law in any case. There's no empirical evidence that it's needed. We have existing laws which prevent harassment. It's a restriction on freedom of expression. It's a restriction on freedom of association. And it's a restriction on freedom of religion and belief, and quite significantly so. And the standard under the convention, under the Human Rights Act, is that any restriction must be proportionate, and this is clearly disproportionate. It's not necessary in a democratic society, so it doesn't come close to meeting any of the threshold standards for being convention compatible.
So, and Harry, where do you think this goes with the government trying to restrict free speech in certain areas on certain topics?
Well, I think it fits entirely with the current state of play that we find ourselves in. We've moved from a position where we're very fortunate as Englishmen, being born in Britain, that we are free to think, speak, act, and do, right up until the point that the law specifically says this far and no further.
Yeah.
Now, for there to be a fresh law enacted, it has to be addressing a very particular and well evidenced and well documented problem that needs solving. There simply isn't one here. There isn't one here. What this is tinkering. What this is moving us slowly into a position of legal micromanagement, which is the continental model of permissions, where the state tells us what we can and what we can do, and where we can and where we can't do it. That is fundamentally un-British, and I think it's part and parcel of a very insidious move towards a Napoleonic European system of legal management.
Which is, and that's very concerning, isn't it? Because it is very draconian, this amendment, is it not, like Roger? Because even expressing an opinion, potentially offering to help a woman who's on her way to an abortion clinic, even silent prayer, would be a criminal offence.
It's quite shocking, and I couldn't agree more that it's draconian. And what this is really is the mob shouting that a minority of people shouting that we need to prevent people from doing sidewalk counseling or prayer, and the government reacting. So there's no need except to appease the mob, and that's not how we should be making laws in this country, because that's not democracy. That's a form of populism and tyranny. And I have zero doubt that if this were to go to judicial review, it would be struck down, or at the very least, if it needed to go to Strasbourg, that this amendment, if passed, won't stand a chance. It won't withstand judicial scrutiny.
So I can see that David McCareth is watching live here on YouTube, and he's put a comment in there saying some of us will go to prison for praying. And of course, we did have an instance of that where nice to see you, David, by the way, and we continue to follow and support your case. But of course, Christian Hacking did pray outside the abortion clinic and was arrested, and unfortunately we got him cleared for that. But do you think that there will be campaigners here who will deliberately go and pray and sort of be kind of legal martyrs, I suppose, for this, Roger?
Legal campaigners on our side or their side?
Our side.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I don't know if they'll go with the sole intent of becoming martyrs, but they'll go because their conscience is telling them that in those clinics there are countless unborn children whose lives are being ended at various stages of their development, and they can't stand by and let that happen. And so they will come and they'll pray. They'll be peaceful. They'll talk to women. In some cases, they will save the life of that unborn child. And to live in a society where we think that that's a bad thing says a great deal about the lawmakers who think that this is a necessary action.
And Michael Petek, I notice also watching, says, lost it now. Buffer zones protect and are intended to protect the practice of forced abortion. I mean, that's a strong way of putting it, but that, if people are coerced into going into an abortion clinic, anybody who tries to dissuade them will be committing a criminal offence.
I mean, I think there's some. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Again, it cannot be the business of the state. It cannot be the business of the state to tell us who we can and cannot pray for, and where we can and cannot pray. Look, if you're pro-choice or whether you're pro-life, it matters not a dot to me. You have the right to state your case without interference from the police. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, I'm very much pro-life, but I would absolutely support the right for somebody to argue and demonstrate and all the rest of it. They can do that. That's what being in a democracy means. You're allowed to state your case. And as has already been said, there are plenty of laws existing that prevent that would deal with harassment. Public order acts, they're right there. If you stand there and there's some poor woman going in for an abortion and you target her and you abuse her and or, you just shout and make a scene, then quite rightly the police should take you away. You're doing no good whatsoever. But to stand there and offer an alternative, stand there and silently pray, to stand there and genuflect, to make the sign of the cross, simply to be there representing an opinion and representing what you believe the will of God to be, how can that be criminalized? It's nonsensical and it's very dangerous.
Yeah, these are not people who are gluing themselves to the road or anything like that. They're not doing any of those things. And of course, the police don't deal with that sort of stuff as aggressively as many people feel they should. These are very peaceful, well-meaning protesters who just want to help and encourage, and very often do see women turn back and will save their lives or reconsider what they're doing, and then babies are born and supported and all of that as well.
Yeah,
so
the reality is that there are women who are going for abortions for any number of reasons. Some of them are feeling forced by a partner who doesn't want the child.
Yeah.
And in some of those cases, the partner is saying, "I'm only going to stay with you if you abort the child."
Yeah.
There could be abuse there. There could be a million things there. Financial concerns that might be alleviated through counseling. So to not even give them that option is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling.
And where do you think this goes, Roger? So the government has said it doesn't, this breaches human rights.
Yeah,
big admission there. That would, if it was an illegal case, you've got the government's already admitted it here. But do you think that's what would happen? The House of Lords will probably try and amend it, but if it goes into law, there's bound to be a legal case, isn't there? And presumably, one hopes it would never end up standing up.
And I have a sneaking suspicion that we might be the ones involved in that case. But no, I think that if the Lords have any sense, especially looking at that statement and looking at the incompatibility issues, that they will just say this doesn't pass legal muster. Let's move on and scrap it. But if not, it's a slam dunk as far as the judicial review goes. Okay,
well, we will see. But it's quite shocking that MPs voted for such a draconian amendment. I mean, that's the really shocking part about this, isn't it?
And in a large margin as well. It
Yeah.
wasn't a small margin.
Yeah. So let's move.
All I'm saying, if you don't mind, I'm just saying we have another problem though as well with even if the law says what we would like it to say, and even if you were to win a judicial review, there is still unfortunately going to be a disconnect between what the law says and how police operates. We found that with the hate crime speech. We soundly beat the College of Policing. Has it changed anything? It's changed the wording. That's all. It hasn't changed anything on the ground. None whatsoever. There's an appalling disconnect between how police forces and foundational institutions operate, because if they think they're on the right side of history, they are much less concerned about being on the wrong side of the law.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that links into the next subject we'll talk about, which is Islamophobia, because of course Hatan Tash got an apology and £10,000 of legal compensation from the police for being wrongfully arrested. And what has she been doing? She's been criticizing Islam, as she does. And the police arrested her, and they shouldn't have arrested her. They should have arrested other people who were threatening her and have, of course, assaulted her and abused her and all that kind of thing, none of whom have been arrested. But the bit of good news this week is the government has decided to abandon attempts to define this notorious term Islamophobia. And there's been a proposed definition from the all-party parliamentary group on Muslims in Britain, which was very vague and dangerous. And the government, rightly after considerable pressure, didn't adopt that as a formal definition, but decided to appoint some people to propose an alternative definition. That was back in 2019. Here we are in 2022, and the government has finally said, right, forget that. We're not going to bother trying to define Islamophobia. Harry, what's your take on where we are on this Islamophobia issue?
Well, I am Islamophobic. I think that being Islamophobic is perfectly rational. In the same way that there are certain left-wing feminists who are patriarchy phobic. In other words, they recognise, or in their head, there is a link between violence against women and the patriarchy. Now, whether I agree with that or not, it's a perfectly legitimate position to take. And I think it's exactly the same with Islamophobia. I see a direct link between the oppression of women and Islam. I do. I do. And to deny me of the right to hold that position is abominable. So of course you can't correctly define Islamophobia in any way that makes sense from a legal perspective. Islamophobia literally means fear of Islam. Well, you cannot have the state tell you what you can and can't fear.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that is effectively what it is, isn't it? And of course, there are other links as well between Islam and grooming gangs, for example, or Islam and terrorism as well, for example, and one must be able to point out these links, and people are afraid of pointing out these links precisely because they're afraid of being called Islamophobic. I call that Islamophobia phobia, effectively.
And that's why I'm more than happy to embrace the term. I am an Islamophobe. I am, in the same way that I am a transphobe. Absolutely. Right. And the definition of transphobia is to disbelieve in gender identity. It's right there within the police guidance. Yeah, I'm a transphobe.
Is that actually the police? It's actually the police definition, is it?
That is the police definition. Yeah, a failure to accept a person's gender identity, and of course there are several hundred of those. Take your pick. That is the police definition of transphobia. So yeah, I'm not going to fight it anymore. I'm going to roll with it and say yes, absolutely, 100%. I am a transphobe, and I don't care.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. Roger, what's your take on this?
Article 9, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, that element, freedom of thought, that is one of the very few absolutely unqualified rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. You have an absolute right to believe anything you want and to change your beliefs. So this idea of phobia, where the definition ultimately is in the eyes of the beholder, is very dangerous, because when you have two people with who are on opposite sides of a certain belief, there's going to be hurt feelings, and one person is going to take it as being aggressive or phobic, and that's no standard by which we should be judging behavior, criminal or civilly. And so I completely agree with scrapping it.
Yeah, and I think the proposed definition sort of defined it in terms of perceived Muslimness. I mean, it's just incredibly vague. I mean, it's a definition based on perception is basically, first of all, lacks objectivity, and Muslimness. What does that mean? And it could include beliefs or practice or whatever, and that means you can't criticize Islamic beliefs. I mean, it's basically kind of effectively an Islamic blasphemy law that one would be enacting if one defined Islamophobia in anything like that kind of term. People would feel they can't criticize Islamic beliefs, like you can't even say Muhammad is not a prophet, for example.
I remember years ago I was involved in an OSCE debate, and the head of the ACLU at the time was there. I believe he was the head. He was one of the executives there, and it was shortly after 9/11. And he was making the argument that saying Islamic terror is hate speech, so that's Islamophobia. So that's how far this definition can stretch.
Yeah, and if we define Islamophobia, then presumably we're going to have to define transphobia and homophobia and Hindu phobia and whatever other phobias. And everyone wants to have their own definition. We're defining all these phobias in some way or other. And there'll be competition to get the best definition of what phobia you want to have. Proliferation of phobias all over the place, Harry.
But yeah, again, what's happened? If you look back at the purpose of the Equality Act, it was to protect individuals from discrimination. It's very straightforward. Now, what's happened is we've moved. There's been an anthropomorphism from protecting the individual against discrimination, to protecting the ideology that the individual adopts. So I am all in favor, for instance, of not discriminating against you if you're trans, not discriminating you if you're Muslim. But I am entirely against having to tacitly or actively support your Muslimness or your transness. And I don't want any protections whatsoever as a Christian, none whatsoever. If you want to say that the resurrection was a conjuring trick with bones, as the Bishop of Durham famously said several decades ago, then absolutely you're free to say it. But by the same token, if I want to point out the fact that Muhammad was a paedophile, then I need to be able to say that as well. You know, you can't defame the dead, or in Christ's case, the resurrected. You simply can't. And if you're a person of faith and you believe that your God, whichever God that happens to be, is supreme and almighty, then come on, surely that God can take a bit of criticism. Surely.
Well, I mean, I agree with you on that, but that is a very good point. Of course, you know, when Jesus, as I said, I've said this on live on the radio in Debating a Muslim, when Jesus was nailed to a cross, tortured, nailed to a cross, he said, "Father, forgive them." And when Muhammad was insulted, he said, "Kill them; they should be killed." And you know, Islam is very intolerant of any criticism, and that's sort of where we are on this kind of thing. But of course, your point about Muhammad being a paedophile actually is also in the news this week, because a Christian preacher, we managed to get him cleared of any charges, but what he was arrested for was criticizing Islam, and in particular noting that Muhammad, according to the best Islamic sources, married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. And as Sean O'Sullivan, the preacher, said, by modern standards, that would be a paedophile. Now, if we had a formal definition of Islamophobia on the statute book, so to speak, then this would be a criminal offense, but it shouldn't be. Roger, what's your take on that particular case?
Good thing we have a formal definition of pedophilia. I mean, that's interestingly, there was a case at the European Court of Human Rights a few years ago dealing with this out of Austria, and they found that the applicant in that case was guilty of hate speech, or at least that Austria had the right to fine her for making the comment that Muhammad was a pedophile, saying that it was inflammatory and really going out of its way to suggest that this was lacking context, and in the time of Muhammad this would have been normal, and I think that's ridiculous to say to the average person, whether you're a preacher or otherwise, having a conversation with an individual or a group of people, that they have to be so careful in their thinking to understand the historical context of everything they say and every possible avenue that opinion can go, or it might be hate speech.
No, I do remember that different, Roger. It's
the chilling effect. The chilling effect on that is just outstanding. The truth should always be a defense, and to say, and he qualified it by modern standards, that would be pedophilia. So I don't see how you can look at it as anything but a statement of fact.
So here we are, another street preacher. I think we've got still a 100% track record of getting these street preachers cleared of charges in the end. But so he should never have been arrested in the first place. What's he done? He's criticized Islamic beliefs. Well, that should be totally fair to do. No problem at all to do it. And yet he was arrested and charged. And finally in court, you get the result. And how this kind of plays into what you were saying earlier about it doesn't really matter if you win the law, because the police carry on arresting people because they think that's the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah, because they found a way of bypassing due process. What would normally happen is you would have in your mind an offence. You would believe that the person committed the offence. You would arrest them. You would take them to a custody sergeant, where you would have to persuade the custody sergeant that they'd committed the offence and there were grounds to holding them. You would then have to persuade the CPS if you chose to charge them and take them to court, and then you would have to persuade a jury or a judge that they were guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Now, all of that takes a lot of time and effort. So the police have found a different way, a much more efficient way of dealing with problems that they don't like, which is to ignore all of that and simply arrest people and then de-arrest them, to give them non-crime hate incidents, to give them niche incidents, whatever the heck they are, to mark down their character as somewhat bad by bypassing the system, creating a chilling effect, and just basically harassing people into conformity. That's what's happening.
And what can we do about this, Harry? What can we do to change the system or change the practice, rather?
Resist at every level. Resist at every level. You know what I did in Aldershot in the summer, where we met the police officers who we knew were turning up to the home of a former Royal Green Jacket who'd put up a trans flag in a certain way that it may have resembled a swastika. We knew full well those police officers were acting entirely illegally. So we confronted them. I got arrested for my efforts and thrown in the cells for several hours. But that's what you have to do. We have to resist. Now, one of the things that I will do at some point, maybe next year, is I will go to Hyde Park Corner and I will preach a blistering gospel in full view of the police and whoever else is there. I'll be entirely uncompromising with the aim of being arrested so that I can take them to court again. I think what we have to do, if you feel as though you have the calling for it, if you've got the mettle for it, if you're made that way, you have to go out and you have to resist. You have to say that thing which is legal, but which the police think is unkind. You have to go out and do it. Otherwise, we'll allow the Overton window to be closed, and that'll be that.
And do you think there are enough people who resisting in that kind of way, or who are called, gifted, whatever, to resist in that way to actually make a difference, Harry?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it takes that many. I don't think there are that many. Look what I've done. Look what Maya Forstadt has done. Yeah. We've changed the complexion of British politics and ideology, and that's two of us. That's two of us. So we can do it now. Absolutely, not everybody is called to that kind of life of an activist. They aren't. They just aren't. But if you are called to that sort of life, then crack on and do it. That's my view. You put on the full armor of God, take your shield of faith, take the sword of the Spirit, and go out there and kick some ass. That's my, as I've said to you before, Tim. That's my style of Christianity. That's me fulfilling my calling. It's very Old Testament in its approach, but it's also very effective.
Very good. Well, then let's just sort of conclude. So the question that we were sort of posing at the start here is: does the government care about free speech? And I suppose for me, the simple answer to that is, if they're prepared to pass a motion that would make it illegal to express an opinion in certain areas of the country, with a high majority in Parliament, you can't say the government cares about free speech, can you? I mean, Roger or Harry, any further concluding comments on this?
I would just say depends on the MP and depends on the issue. But that just shows how important it is for our supporters to be frequently in contact with their MPs to make sure that they're voting on the right side of these issues. Yeah.
Harry, any concluding comments from you?
I'm cautiously optimistic with Rishi Suella and Kemi Badenoch, of course. I think one of the main problems is the civil service, or the blob. I think if we've got politicians who are prepared to deal with the blob and given time to deal with the blob, I think the landscape could be better. I think we could be going into a better place than we've been. So I'm cautiously optimistic. But that's just my nature.
Well, great. Listen, it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Harry, for all that you're doing and the difference that you're making, which is brilliant. And Roger as well, helping us with our various legal cases, which are great. Get out there and speak the truth, Harry, says Shirley Hogg there. That's great. Listen, and thanks for watching. Thanks for engaging with us. And we'll see you again next week. Do follow us, connect with us on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And see you again next week. Thank you very much.